we see this.
Oh, yeah.
You quoted somebody, what was their norm, right? I only read books that I'm interested in reading.
Oh, yeah.
Now imagine if you started to apply that, which I think you're getting there.
I definitely have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. That has now changed. That gravity and velocity that they generated, and they threw that little nugget in there, right? Now that's changed your norm.
It has. Welcome to the Enso Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, how are you today?
I'm well. I'm just feeling great about not knowing anything at all and exploring it.
It is freeing, honestly. I feel like, especially in the working world, there's this tremendous pressure to appear as though you know it all, especially about your subject matter. And that's I don't think that that's reasonable or even possible. It's definitely not possible.
No. I don't think it's possible. But it is very hard to appear to be productive if you can't appear to be competent.
Yeah. That's a better standard, though, like competence, right, than knowing it all. And I think if we could focus a little bit more on just being competent and a little bit less on
being enough
to know it all. Yeah.
Just enough.
Enoughness. I like hopefully I'm not misattributing this, but Ram Dass is talking about the I am enough statement, which is like a wonderful concept, right? I think it's foundational. If you don't have that belief deep in your identity, then it's, there are a lot of problems that are going to cascade out of that. However, I like his perspective on it was, why don't we just shorten it to I am? There's no evaluation there. I'm enough. I'm not enough. It's just I am. I am exactly as I am in this present moment, and maybe that in and of itself is enough.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to weigh ourselves against something where there's the potential to be found wanting.
It's certainly enough to make the attempt.
To exist, to be.
Yeah. I mean, this is one big attempt at something. We don't know what that is.
I don't even know what it is.
Right?
Yeah. We might have some ideas.
It's one big attempt. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's ideal way to start off this podcast, I think. So thank you.
Yeah.
So,
no
Josiah, what are we talking about today?
So we're going to continue on some themes, some things that kind of were brought to light on some earlier episodes. So those things are time dilation, neutral thinking, and cognitive reframing. So we want to explore those because we didn't have enough time.
Right.
And, we didn't hear this from anyone in our audience, but we think, if we were to hear some feedback from our audience, they would want to know more about those terms. They'd want to know more about, what we think about them and how they impact our everyday lives. And that's what we're here to do, explore.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll talk about that later. We'll have a feedback mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody wants to ask a question or something. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah.
And just for clarity's sake, this is within the scope of our greater series now on attachment, which you may have covered. But yeah, this is...
I certainly did not.
Okay, good. So how do we relate these? I kind of think of them as tools. Time dilation, cognitive reframing, and neutral thinking. I think they can be powerful tools for navigating attachment.
Yeah.
Like we talked about before, attachment isn't good or bad, but it is, it's part of our environment. it's part of being a human being. You're going to interact with it. So how can we do that in a way that's more adaptive than maladaptive? And, I also want to apologize in advance for my sniffles.
Yeah, it's okay.
Because I may be sniffling. So I'll extend this apology to Josiah, to all of our listeners, our incredible sound engineer, Sarah, also,
No
honorable
problem.
mention. We'll soldier on through this.
So I have the sparkles for anyone watching.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I don't know if that's visible to our viewers, but Josiah is radiant today. He's sparkling, he's glowing. So,
Yes.
anyways, okay, let's kick us off. I'd like to start with time dilation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so time dilation, I learned about this from you. I never heard about it, but I love the concept. I think it's infinitely fascinating. And I'm hoping you might be able to give us maybe a definition, maybe a little background,
I'll
any insights.
Give you context first.
Ooh, yeah.
It's widely accepted that time is relative and not an absolute constant, but it can be influenced by the observer's frame of reference and external forces like velocity and gravity, right? So it's by definition, it's more of a physics concept. But it's also a phenomenon, right? And I think it's a phenomenon that is not only expressed in physics, but expressed in, how we reference things, how we perceive events, and the impact that those events have on our life, and the insight that we take from that impact, and then how we make decisions, and those decisions become a frame of reference for someone else, or
Right.
frame of observation for someone else. So, the way it works is, the phenomenon where time appears to pass more slowly for an object in motion compared to one at rest. We as individuals can influence our frame of reference by understanding that we are contemporaneously in motion and at rest. So we can influence our impact in time when we realize the importance of our self-determination, energetic momentum, attraction, and velocity, and when we harness the inherent attributes, or these inherent attributes, we create a similar dynamic as time dilation.
Okay, so for I'm gonna come in behind you
Sure.
and do some for the layperson, right? That was a very technical definition, and if you're a genius like Josiah is, then that makes perfect sense to you. But if you're a little bit more like me, then I think a helpful reference that Josiah shared with me previously is that similar to how we can read someone's life experience from a book, like a biography, we can benefit tremendously from what they learned throughout the course of their experience. And it takes us a matter of hours, right, in most cases, to finish a book, whereas it took that person their entire lifetime. So that is an extremely value-dense period of time for us when we read about their life experiences, the condensed, distilled lessons. There's a lot of value in that.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps to kind of put some context around time dilation.
Yeah, excuse me.
No, please go for it.
To really simplify it, we're observers of someone's life while we're in motion.
Mhm.
We're reading that autobiography. We're essentially looking at what they have written down about their life while they're in a state of rest. Essentially, they've stopped enough to write it down, to really assess the impact, convey the insight, and we're slowing down enough in our motion. Maybe we're reading a couple pages a day or whatever it is, but we come across that aha moment, and from what we've observed, and then that completely changes our frame of reference. So yeah, I agree. That's a really good example.
So I think this is a great point to draw our attention to a realization, something that I learned in the past few years, that learning itself doesn't occur through experience, happens through reflecting on experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to write something like a biography where you're distilling lessons that, these lessons were learned over decades, sometimes better part of a century, and then putting them into text, you have to reflect on what it meant to you and the knowledge that you gained from it and how you were able to put that into action, right? Because knowledge without action is useless. It has no effectiveness in the world. But when we can take that genuine understanding of a concept or a situation or a number of situations and then transform those into informed action, we have a word for that. We call it wisdom.
Yes.
So I think that that's incredibly valuable, and that has to happen. It's a prerequisite to writing a book or distilling any kind of information. That also leads me to something you were talking about. I can't exactly remember now what you said that made me think of this, but have you ever studied up much on Montaigne? I think I'm probably mispronouncing that. He's an existentialist philosopher.
No, I haven't. Can't say I have.
Okay, well, this is a rare opportunity where I know something that Josiah doesn't.
We'll see.
Right? Anyways, so when I was learning about Montaigne, one of the things that really stuck out to me was how in his literary works he talked about, he's a voracious reader, right? But he refused to read books that were not interesting to him at that point in time. And he had this understanding that today this book doesn't fascinate me, but a year from now it might, and I may come back to it. And he had this trust in the process, or fate, whatever you want to call it, that the books that he needed to read, kind of this relating back to our soul curriculum, right? There are things that Montaigne was responsible for learning throughout his lifetime, and he trusted in the process that those books would find their way to him and they would be made accessible at the proper time, or he would have the resources, the knowledge, access to that information to go and find it when he needed it. And I think that's really fascinating. I'm hoping that maybe it resonates with others. I know I have definitely started books and kind of like the eat your vegetables mentality, like I started this book so I must finish it. And then just through sheer willpower and determination have soldiered on through a book that I wasn't really absorbing anything from, didn't really enjoy, and I also, there's an opportunity cost associated with that, isn't there? Right. Yeah. Because we could be reading something different, something that actually does fascinate us. Do you have thoughts on this? I know you're a voracious reader also.
I do. I do think, you summed it up perfectly when you said there's an opportunity cost, right? That is an assessment I am trying to do my best, and not only reading, but any activity that I do. What do I stand to gain out of this experience, and what else could I be doing? And I think that is the principle of time dilation, that we are so conscious that we can say, for the most part, this is going to cost me a quarter of my life if I marry this woman. Or, this is going to cost me, a half a day if I do this research, right? We get to say that. Our consciousness has evolved that much over a relatively short period of time in the universe, albeit 4.5 billion years, but the planet Earth doesn't get to say how old it is. It doesn't know, right? It's just trapped in the relatively lowest form of consciousness about itself.
Oh my gosh!
Right, and so I think for us, we can literally expand or contract the amount of time that we spend dealing with the consequences of our actions and decisions by observing not only our experience, but any experience, relative to how much we know or how much context we have on that experience, right? So I think that's kind of where I have a philosophy where, I don't necessarily read a lot of books that are by people that are alive, especially if it's about like their life, right? Like I try to wait until, well, I'm not trying to outlive anybody, but I try to. For me, it's about seeing a person's full life and how it actually played out in the end, because I'm learning from that experience, and maybe it's just like the younger brother in me, but there is an opportunity cost associated with not only what we read, and when we choose to read it, but just overall the experiences that we observe and what we, to your point, what we take and apply. And that's why I try to be as selective in those experiences that I actually look at.
Wow. I feel like there are so many gems in what you just shared. One of the ones that struck me is how awareness it's a privilege. I've never considered that before.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, if we can zoom out far enough to see the edges, then it's pretty clear that we are so fortunate to just have this level of awareness of ourselves relative to all that ever has been.
Right.
We have a lot of agency just in that
do.
reflection.
We do. We can reflect on, like I said, that we are in rest and in motion at the same time. We can literally slow our minds down to a state of rest and observe our motion and try to understand the impact of it, and then make responsible decisions as best we can.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's what makes us unique as beings.
That level of awareness, for sure.
Yeah.
Right, in the animal kingdom. So something else that you mentioned when we were talking about time dilation, it made me think, and we can move on here to the next topic soon, but it made me think about something you wrote about in your book with the opportunity cost of walking your dog, right? Can you talk about that?
That has not been released yet.
Right. If you're not
comfortable. So I think that's actually where I started to explore this concept, because you'll hear people say, well, I wish I had time to do blank, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really, one thing that they're saying is, I wish I could make the choice to use my energy in a different way, because they're not really using the time. The time is just there.
Right.
They're using their energy or expressing their energy in that particular environment throughout time. And so their level of awareness of how they're expressing their energy, and for some people, I just gave an example of like walking the dog and how many times.
So many of us have dogs,
how many times we walk the dog per day, and then what that equates to in terms of the hours per year, and then across a 13-year span, how many hours are spent, and then what you could actually do with those hours, some other activities, common activities that we say we wish we could do. Right. And I won't go all, deeply into the details there.
Keep them wanting more. They need to get the book when it comes out.
Right. But for the most part, what I was saying is engaging in an exercise like that about our own activity and about our own energy. If we have what I think are the most optimistic takeaways, which is, wait, I could be using my time to do this, or I could be using my energy to do this, and it would be a greater yield of my time. And in that way, in my opinion, it dilates the time, right? The continuum in a way, and not only for us, but if we do something that is an observable work with that energy and with that time, then in some ways it may help someone else slow down or speed up, depending on the insight that they take from it.
Wow, what the heck? Okay, so now I'm thinking, if we want to prioritize, you talked about yield, right? So this relates to what's our return on investment. In order to have a return, we have to have something that we value.
Right.
So that naturally leads back to values. And I think to go further down this rabbit trail, the values become a form of gravity. They have a very similar function. They anchor us to a specific point in space and time. And they can, when we know our values very clearly, they free up, they dilate our time because it strips away the things that don't actually matter to us. I think you could, to some degree, make a similar attribution to goals. Goals and values, which share a lot in common, right?
They do.
Just kind of different clothes,
Yeah.
but similar principle. And I think the contrary is also true, that when we don't have clarity on our values or our goals, which this is ubiquitous in today's society, right? And then there's kind of this sensation of like floating, aimless wandering, being lost in space. And how convenient is it for the purpose of this metaphor that, they don't have that gravity.
Yeah.
Nothing is pulling them to somewhere that they actually want to be. And then the last little leg of this metaphor that I'll make is we can also have gravity around things that we don't actually want.
So I agree. And that's what in the book, when I finally released it, what I talked about before that was how, like I said, we think it's about time, but it's really about responsibility and freedom of expression of energetic expression, right? So, we're spending the same amount of time each day, and we're deciding how to spend it. And what is really driving us is either our goals or intentions, or our lack of intention that is really being driven by our voids. And both have one, we intentionally create our own gravity and velocity and momentum on one hand, or we have this gravitational void or black hole, and I can't remember the exact term that was used in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, but he actually gave a term where there's like this deep, endless void inside of us that it has its own momentum and gravity. And in a lot of ways, when we go get those, and I'm not downing pets, I'm just saying when we go get those distractions, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
That eat up our expression of energy in time, it's really meeting a void in us. And it could be the void that's created by feeling alone or being lonely, and therefore we distract ourselves with something for 5 years or 13 years. I mean, we've all seen it. Like, there's people that like love their pet or whatever it is, and then they meet a significant, they get a significant other, and it's like, ugh,
the pet
that thing.
is like now a detail, distraction,
and
annoyance.
So it's like, was it always? I mean, a distraction or Yeah.
I think it really resembles. I remember the first time I was exposed to this idea, I was in junior high, and one of my more intelligent classmates gave this presentation where he talked about. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. He gave this presentation about the dynamic between a husband and a wife whenever kids are introduced into the equation. That suddenly the husband can feel as though he's a second-class citizen, which of course this is not this is not guaranteed. This is just something that happens sometimes, right? Yeah. But I think it reminds me of something that I listen to, and a meditation that I do, every single day. You're a daily meditator too, but it talks about the harmonization of our goals. Mm-hmm. So how can I design it in such a way that progress towards goal A also furthers progress towards goal B? And these goals are independent, but they're also interrelated, or interdependent might be a better term.
They're all interdependent, in my opinion, at least with two variables. Experience, meaning your experience, and time. So if it involves some sort of experience, and that experience is had by a fellow human being relative to the goal that I want to accomplish, well then the way that I could accelerate me getting there is to sit down with that individual, or to read something from that individual that has more experience than me. Or maybe it's a group of individuals, right? I'm accelerating how I get there, quite possibly, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then also understanding about time, not doing things that, eat up my energetic expression throughout time. Right. That doing things, to your point earlier, that align with the goal, align with the intention.
That only happens when we can pause for a moment, rise above.
State of rest.
Yeah, state of rest. Motion. Yeah, while in motion. Yep. Rise above the clutter of thought. Everything's still going on down here, but have the awareness, recognize that awareness is a privilege, and reflect on, what's actually important here, what matters. And then we can design a situation that makes it inevitable, makes attaining our goals inevitable, which I think is really exciting. And this might be the perfect segue into cognitive reframing.
Yeah.
Because I think cognitive reframing is a design principle. It's literally designing the kind of like neural architecture of your mind to produce a specific response or outcome. Mm-hmm. Which I'm over here defining it. I don't even have the definition. I'm just spitballing over here. You want to help us out with a definition?
Yeah, it's a more accepted definition is cognitive reframing is a psychological technique used to help individuals change the way they perceive or interpret a situation, person, or relationship. By shifting the perspective, it aims to alter the emotional impact and response to that situation. So this technique can be practiced independently or with the help of a professional, especially when dealing with negative thought patterns.
Mm-hmm. Right. I like that it mentions the emotional component in there. And I don't know why I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I think cognitive reframing is so useful that I think of it as just a very practical, tactical tool, But the outcome is oftentimes it's the way that we feel about a certain thing. And we've talked about this before. Our emotions are a source of fuel, right? And they can burn us down, or they can help us reach the moon. It's up to us to determine like how we're going to leverage those combustible materials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think with time dilation, there's an emotional factor. If I both of these, right? So I think you have to cognitively reframe to really get the benefits of time dilation. So let's say I come from a family with chronic illness, and that chronic illness is really due to a lot of factors, but poverty, not having an access to health care, poor eating habits, just poor lifestyle decisions.
Yeah.
And that's been occurring for generations. And then all of a sudden there's some person, in a relatively young age, and they read a book, or they attend a seminar, or there's something, and
You're
it's
exposed to a new idea, a new way of being.
in a very benign way, right?
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't make any sense except for whenever you're like looking back over the course of that person's life and you find it like, oh,
Right.
that was the 2-hour event that like helped them get on this trajectory.
Yeah, it's an
right?
inflection point.
Yes, inflection
Yeah.
point. Yes. And so, like, let's say that person decides to start eating healthier, or decides to move to a different state with better prospects,
Right.
Or decides to take out that student loan. And, you know, you look back on their life and they have effectively, you know, dilated time, you know, not only for themselves, but now their children who have a different frame of observation. You know, that is really attributable to the parents who were at one point younger adults who decided to cognitively reframe the negative perspective that they had around their family's medical history.
Right.
Right? They
Yeah.
said, wait, this is something I can do something about. I went to this seminar and I'm like, well, maybe if I just had, I don't know, my healthy greens 3 times a week. Well, wait, what are healthy greens? I never saw those growing up. You know, like just different things like that, right? That reframe the way that they're thinking things, or they're thinking about things, their perspective, that ultimately end up becoming a new frame of observation that then create that velocity and gravity for everyone that is within their orbit.
It's interesting because it makes me wonder if cognitive reframing at its essence is really anything more than just openness to a new perspective, willingness
Yes.
to consider a new perspective.
I think yes, but first, and this is why I actually try to tie them together. I don't think I did a good job, but it is also willingness to the emotional pain. Because first, like that young person that goes to that seminar, they have to accept that is not their current situation, and that is painful. They have to accept, like, wait, my family is making poor decisions, and invariably I'm going to be making poor decisions if I keep this up.
Right.
And that's painful, because they have to essentially say, most people that I know, most of the things that I know are wrong relative to the results that I want.
Why do you think that that's painful?
Because our identity is tied to who we know, right? Our environment that we grew up in, and then what we know. We have to either say I'm ignorant, or I'm misinformed, or, you know, I'm stupid. Like, I know what to do, but I'm not doing it, right? And I think all three of those, on their own, are painful enough to have to admit. But to have to admit, you know, one or more, oof, that's rough.
It's painful to, or you said identity, right? And I think ego, right?
Yeah.
It's that the worthiness factor comes in when we're, you know, if it's true that we are not on a good track, maybe that our family hasn't been on a good track, we start struggling with these questions of worthiness. And I think it's an easy association to make. I don't know that it's at all helpful, and I don't think it's rooted in reality. You know, and this is subjective, right? But I'm a fan of the school of thought that everyone we have inherent worth. If you are a human being, right? And honestly, I think this extends beyond human beings too, right?
Yeah.
But just for our purposes today, if you're a human being, you have inherent worth, and that is set.
Yeah.
And it's immovable. It's unchanging. Your worthiness is secure. So if we're able to accept that as true, whether, you know, whether it's true objectively or not, if we're able to accept
As
it as a
constant.
fundamental,
Yeah.
it's constant, then it frees us up to say, maybe it's entirely possible that we've been doing the best we can with the information that we had access to at the time. And maybe we've also ignored information in the past, and we had our reasons for doing that as well. But right now, in this present moment, there's an opportunity to change the trajectory of my life, and I get to make that choice.
Of my life, right?
Yeah.
And I agree. I think, and I'm just saying that we naturally gravitate towards the pain, the emotional component, and a lot of people, to your point, they will feel unworthy, right? They'll sabotage themselves. I mean, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
When there is an opportunity to do better or become better, to actually reach our goals, we find a reason not to do it.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways that is, there's an emotional component that makes us feel as if we're either betraying, our family, ourself, our identity, right?
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to cognitive reframing, it's all about the perception, right? And then taking on a new perspective that says, this has nothing to do with my self-worth.
Mm-mm.
I'm inherently worthy of possibility. And once that's, like I said, that's tweaked, that
Mm-hmm.
cognitive reframing is actually executed, then we can start to generate our own velocity, our own gravity, like you said, where
Yeah.
it's like, oh, wait, I get to make the choice. I get to make the decision. And I think when, that happens, we start to develop our own orbit. And that impacts how we're observed, right? Those external factors like velocity and gravity that then change the norm for a lot of people. We see this.
Oh, yeah.
You quoted somebody, what was their norm, right? I only read books that I'm interested in reading.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Now imagine if you started to apply that, which I think you're getting
definitely
there.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. That has now changed. That gravity and velocity that they generated, and they threw that little nugget in there, right? Now that's changed your norm.
It
Does that
has,
make
and
sense?
it's changed
Yeah.
my life.
It has changed your life. It is essentially dilated time because you're not reading things, you're not spending the time reading things that you're not interested in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How much time have I saved? How many, this is really crazy, is I think on average I have read so many more books
Mhm.
because I think any reader experiences this. If reading has become a chore to you, then you've made it difficult.
Yep.
And it's if you make something difficult, you will reduce the frequency of that outcome. Make it easier, you will increase the frequency of that outcome. So
Yes.
I've definitely read more, and I think, and also just quick quality of life break, right? Like I think sometimes, especially in highly ambitious circles, you get this. How are we maximizing yield and ROI and all? Like, how are we making progress towards our goals and driving, pushing the needle, moving the needle, whatever.
Mhm.
But let's just pause for a second and appreciate. I think achievement is part of why we're here, right?
Yeah.
I believe that work exists for man, and man doesn't exist for work. Work can be a source of meaning and purpose and fulfillment.
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily think it's the end-all be-all, and I think that the degree to which you are having fun
Mhm.
and enjoying your experience, I think that it's important, and it's probably a moderator variable. It has a bunch of impacts on a bunch of different situations, but it also can stand alone as a variable in and of itself.
I agree. No, I agree. And if it is observed, then it is going to help others make important decisions about their life. If let's take a field trip to a prison and observe the quality of life there.
Yeah.
And then have someone come ask you, hey, you want to live like that for 5 years? I'll pay you whatever it is. The answer is going to be invariably no for most people.
Most people.
Right? And it's because, from what we've observed, that is not a positive experience. Right. It's not an enjoyable experience, right? So are there other examples out there that aren't as drastic as like prison? Yes. And do we go down that same exercise as often as we could? I don't think we do.
No.
And we give away 5 years of our life in something that is just as bad as, prison for us.
It's a psychological prison.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, I think these principles, when we look at the core component, which is the emotional component, I think they become tools when we learn to address that in ourselves.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Really excited to ask it. How do you know if you're in a psychological prison? Like, how can we step back and just consider, have I trapped myself, with these psychological constraints that now I feel this sense of duty or obligation? And I think this could be, immediately I think of a job, right? I work in hiring, so I see, all too often I see people prioritize an extra, some extra treasure for a much lower quality of life. And, and obviously I have my thoughts and opinions about it, but it's their life. It's not my life. So, I believe they should make their own choices. I definitely encourage people when they ask my opinion, that's not worth reducing the quality of your life. But this could also apply to other situations. This could be relationships. This could be, this could be intrapersonal as well. So anyway,
it is really in rest and in motion.
Exactly.
Right? So I agree. How do you know? The answer is you don't. In fact, I think the answer is you're in prison. You're also in paradise. The question is, how much prison do you want to be in? Or how much time do you want to be in paradise? And so there are going to be times where you're going to have to say, you know what, I'm going to take this psychological prison because I can see that it's going to lead to more paradise.
Yeah. But
you're in both. You're in, at least that's my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you for absolutely crushing this paradigm of like binary thinking that I had going on over here.
Yeah. I listen, I'm a business owner now and, entrepreneur, and I'm looking at things and I'm like, oof, this is rough. I would have never done this, 3 years ago, but I see where it could lead, and that's enough, and I'm willing to give up whatever that time variable or amount or equivalent is.
I hear this story so often that business owners, entrepreneurs, they're like, if I had any idea what I was signing up for, I never would have gotten into it, Yeah. And I laugh because I get it on a level, but I also think that this is an opportunity to use some cognitive reframing, right? And cognitive reframing is a powerful tool towards goal attainment because we have the power to create the landscape in our mind.
You do.
Right? So I don't want to speak in absolutes here, but I would say more often than not, there's a way that you can structure it to make it more palatable, right? Or
yes.
even in some cases, you can learn to embrace that discomfort.
I agree, and I'm going to basically read like the last part of this definition, especially when dealing with negative thought patterns. So cognitive reframing, in my opinion, starts with assessing your thought patterns. And, I think that the thing that allows us to really switch or reframe is first addressing the emotions that we have around the negative thought patterns. Like, what is happening that is making me spiral negatively about my current situation?
Oh, I love that.
And then assessing the elements of that we should be grateful for. So, yeah, I'm not making this amount of money, but I'm also not working in a job that I hate. Or I'm not, being beat up by or abused by a boss, And if you've ever had those experiences, then you can remember or reflect upon those feelings and realize that your current feeling is close, maybe worse, maybe better, and then you can respond with gratitude or action if you need to.
Right.
You can say, wait, you know what? This wasn't, working in a job was nowhere near as emotionally taxing as what I'm going through right now. I'm going to go find a job.
Yeah.
Right? That's action.
Yeah.
Or, you know what? This is nowhere near as emotionally taxing being an entrepreneur as working a job was. I'm going to stick this out because I see it's better, and I'm grateful for all these other elements.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
We have to pause to do that calculus, though.
We do. We have to be in rest while in motion.
Right.
Yeah.
Shout out to our reflection, our sponsor, Reflection.
Mirror, our sponsor.
Yeah. So as we're getting into the nitty gritty of how we're analyzing the context, that whether it's a job or a relationship or an idea, whatever that is, I think this is the perfect segue into neutral thinking.
Yep.
So, because neutral thinking it's a bit of an assessment tool, or at least an assessment aid. It helps us to think critically. Mm-hmm. So could you tell us a little bit about neutral thinking? What is it? How did you come to learn of it?
Yeah. So I was reading a story, and, I do sometimes scan things that I'm not interested in and read them. Sometimes just for concepts. I'm a concept guy. And I can't tell you who wrote the article, but it was about this this ninth year senior, University of Miami tight end who had multiple surgeries, transferred to different schools, and they were obviously talking about the transfer portal in NCAA football. Athletics. So, but one thing that really stuck out was the fact that he kept going, and they were about to play a big game, kind of a quarter way through the season, and they talked about how his perseverance was attributable to something that is known as neutral thinking, and it's a concept that was popularized by a coach and author, Trevor Mowad, I think I'm saying that correctly.
I don't know. So.
In which the recovering athlete doesn't get too low or too high, but focuses on the hard facts of the situation and the incremental progress. So neutral thinking is all about helping people be present in the moment by removing or processing the emotional components. And I added that processing
Removing
piece.
or processing. Yeah, because I think removing could suggest repression.
Yes.
In that, I don't think that that's mandated by neutral thinking.
It's not.
It's probably the opposite.
The opposite. So I'll let you give your thoughts on that, and then I'll, do my best to kind of tie things together.
My thoughts, broadly speaking?
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's really useful. I think it's, as human beings, we're little judgment machines, right? We have this mania for categorizing events, people, places, opportunities as good or bad. And, shout out to Shakespeare, nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I think these value judgments get in the way. They interfere with our critical thinking abilities. Which I remember when I first learned about critical thinking. It's like I was in high school, and there was this incredible professor. Struggling with his name. I wish I could give him a shout out. This would be a real a real cool thing to be able to give him a shout out. But he was a history professor, and he came to our high school and taught a dual credit course, and he basically was like, you guys are farm factory consumer animals inside inside an egregious system. And we're all just like, who is this guy? You know, he's got long hair and these cool glasses, and we're just like, what's going on here?
He just ate an avocado.
He did.
Raw.
Yeah, before it was cool. So anyways, but he was like, you're going to gain something incredibly valuable that you'll use for the rest of your life if you pay attention in this course. And that thing is critical thinking. And I just remember looking around at my classmates, and everybody kind of had this bewildered look on their face. But I think many of us, perhaps not all of us, but many of us came to understand what he meant that day. And those who did, and I definitely put myself in that camp, really doubled down on it and started questioning things like Socratic method, you know, but why? What's the premise? How do we know that this is fundamentally true? What is truth fundamentally? How do we get to the bottom of this in a practical, way? How do we be critical about it? So anyways, that's what neutral thinking reminds me of. Just kind of like, how do we take all the BS out of the equation and get down to what we really know? And then, that's powerful because we can examine all the assumptions that we made along the way. Assumptions tend to be a source of pain and suffering, I think. And that's why, that's a big premise of this podcast, right? Is we're trying to tear down as many assumptions as we can. Obviously, we're not perfect at it. Gosh, we would never claim to be. No. But that's the spirit and intent.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for me, the most critical component of neutral thinking is something that I derived from a write-up on one of my favorite authors, who's now deceased. Daniel Kahneman. But I did read his stuff while he was alive. And what made him, or at least according to the write-up, there are a couple things that kind of made Danny Kahneman. And that is he took a beginner's mindset. And I'll say the second one, I don't think the third one is really germane to what we're talking about, but the second one was that he was self-critical. And I think when you're a person that can harness the principles of neutral thinking, you're self-critical, because being self-critical requires you to process your emotions around your assumptions. Because there's the emotions that lead to assumptions, and then there's the emotions that sustain assumptions. Typically we have like favorable emotions around the validity of an assumption, and then if we're self-critical, we have to go in there and tear down that favorable emotion to then get to the assumption, right? To then get to, the whatever's driving that, right? The experience or whatever it is, and process the emotions around that. So in this case, it could be an injury. It could be, our family that lived an unhealthy lifestyle, and how we felt about that. It could be everything that we need to cognitively reframe. But first, it requires us to be self-critical. And that means we have to be critical of the positive and negative emotions tied to those assumptions.
I am so glad that you brought that up. I find it really fascinating. I also think about what happens when what we're trying to parse or tease apart is of our own making. You know, it's like we can't really point to a family tradition or an injury that happens largely out of our control. What if the very thing that's causing us so much pain is our identity that we have built throughout, you know, let's play this out. Let's say you're 50, 60 years old, and you have built an identity that brings you pleasure, right? It makes you feel safe and in control, but it's also bringing you tremendous pain. You know, what a journey to start to become self-critical at that point and to investigate, examine. I like to highlight it because it's an extreme example, and I think the odds they're not in the favor of this individual.
Yeah.
However, I don't believe that it's fundamentally impossible.
No, it's not.
I think it's still possible. I just think that you know, we evolve in layers, right? And we've talked about this before, but the layers are homogeneous and they're tightly knit. And then we have another layer on top of that, and so the more layers that we add to this situation, the more challenging it becomes to disentangle them all. The more resilient the issue is to being picked apart and ultimately resolved, and it's good and bad.
Right.
So I think that you know, you couldn't really just go on this crusade to like pick apart all of the negative aspects of your identity, you know, that are supporting you, because they're interwoven with positive aspects as well.
Right. And you know, what I'm suggesting is looking at the results that have been brought to bear over time relative to the assumptions that drove us to make some of those decisions, and then how we validated them excuse me, based on the positive or the good feelings that we got. So let's stick with the example of the 50-year-old, right?
Ooh, yeah, I like a challenging problem.
Okay, we talk about in rest and in motion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, let's say you got a couple in their 20s, they get married, they, you know, have kids, and they spend a decent amount of time for the next decade or two really in motion.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then what happens? The kids become young adults or adults. And then what happens in a lot of cases, and I can say this because I saw this 7 times over with my parents, is that they begin to observe their adult children.
Really?
Yeah. And then they start to look at their own life results and some of the decisions that they have made while being young adults like their children were. And they say, you know what? I could have done things differently. And that leads them, in a lot of cases, to start evolving. I've seen this.
Oh, my gosh.
Like evolving their mindset around certain things that they were intransigent, you know, around or relative to.
So do you think that takes us a certain level of humility?
It takes, yes, I think it also takes a certain amount of, or a certain degree of being self-critical.
Yeah.
Right? To say, like I said, it doesn't have to be everything that has to be parsed, but it's a few things based on how the results panned out. And you don't engage in counterfactual thinking.
Right.
Right? You stop yourself or pull yourself out of it before it gets very negative. But then you start to say, like, man, my children, they're turning out to be okay. Or I see some of the decisions that they're making as young adults, and, like, I can actually see, you know, that being a positive thing. Like, what can I do now? You know?
Right.
You know, so I think it does come from a place of humility, but it also comes from, what's there in us inherently, which is the ability to observe, the ability to rest, and make those insights.
Man, I really love this. I didn't know we would stumble upon it, but I think it's so interesting how that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
That parents would observe the lives of their children and that would be thought-provoking, right? Because they've been in this sprint period for so long. They simply have not had as many opportunities to reflect.
Right.
And now they have an abundance of time to reflect. And I think that they're faced, there are two well-defined paths there that could be, well, that just doesn't apply to me. I
agree. I've seen my parents, they haven't raised children for over 18 years now. And I've seen them grow more in that 18 years than what I saw, while living under their roof or living relatively closely to them. And I think it's because they're observing, adults that they're responsible for bringing into the world or facilitating in some way. And they're saying, well, one, our parents never stopped being adults, right? Like, they never stopped being people that want everything, all these things, and they have all these aspirations and dreams, and they want all the experiences, and they have all the experiences of being an actual, adult. But we don't look at them that way.
Mm-mm.
We look at them as like the adult, right? But they're really our peers at some point, right? When we become old enough and they start to observe us, and there is a trust element there, because they're like, I actually do trust my kid. I raised it's the IKEA effect. Like, I built it, right? It is perfect.
It's of high quality.
Yeah. So, and I think that's kind of where I'm going, is that there is, even in the example of the 50-year-old, they're still looking at themselves in a very critical way, and they're doing it because they're able to observe the tangible embodiment of their decisions in some way.
So I'd like to relate this back to time dilation for a second, and think about how when they're in that sprint season, right, where they have kids, let's just say under 18 in the household that they're responsible for caring for and mentoring and developing and all that good stuff, they don't necessarily have as much time to reflect. Kids leave the nest, they're empty nesters, they have an abundance of time to reflect. That could be congestive in some way for some adults, or it could be freeing. It could be the opportunity that results in this an inflection point in their life in terms of growing their perspective and just personal expansion, which is so cool. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering how we could apply this to our lives, just as regular adults, young adults. Like, is there a point at which our lives become so full and so busy that we are failing to reflect and benefit from the perspective that comes from that reflection, the learning that comes from that reflection, and if we're lucky, the wisdom that comes from it? That's probably the exception rather than the rule. But, for somebody who's curious about doing that, implementing it, integrating it into my life, what would you tell somebody like that?
Well, I would take
Joe?
assessment. No, I would, you have to look at time, right? Do I want to wait until I'm 50 to be able to reflect? Am I in a position right now to be able to reflect? I mean, at 32, my dad had 5 children.
Right.
And was married, right? And he had an opportunity to reflect when his spouse died, right? And I'm sure he did. Yeah. But, I was talking to him yesterday, and, I'm 36 now, and I was, for whatever reason, I had insight on things that he hadn't had insight on, and he's 70. Yeah. But I've had so much time, right, to really become and deploy wisdom in some ways, because I haven't had the responsibilities. And I think that's what we can do. If you're listening to this, I think we can reflect on our responsibilities and start to think about how does this impact my time? How does this impact my energetic expression? And what is the opportunity cost?
You up for a little side quest before we close?
Sure.
So I think that I'm about to get married, right? That's coming up very, very soon. And I could see it being plausible to make a case for marriage being an addition of responsibility or a subtraction of responsibility, depending on how you look at it, right? Now, I am very, I have a deeply vested interest in having a healthy and connected marriage, right? So that means I'm probably more likely to invest more time into cultivating the relationship than the average person. However, I think about the flip side of that. When you're in the dating world, just how time consuming that is for most people, and there's so much uncertainty to navigate, and there's, a lot of questions of worthiness are on the line because, it's just like your gravity is in transit and it's inherently more unstable. So do you have any thoughts on that as we kind of wrap this up? If I think it has the potential to go either way, but there may be things that we could do, possibly some cognitive reframing that could help us stack the deck in favor of one outcome.
Well, if you're going to be successfully married, you're going to have to engage in a lot of cognitive reframing. There's definitely some, especially some negative thought patterns that occur that you have to deal with.
You're just telling me this now? Oh my gosh!
But no, I think all jokes aside, there are things that you can do. I mean, you can assess, like I said, the level of responsibility that you want to take on as an individual while being married or as a couple, and I think if you're talking about someone that is going to be your partner, you're going to be emotionally tethered to.
Oh, yeah.
At the very least, emotionally tethered to. If you are feeling something, that person, if you got a connection, they're going to feel it as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you say. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, guys, we say that all the time. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm married to an empath, so I really can't lie about it. Right. But, our significant other, our spouse, they can tell. And so I think that is something that we can definitely do, is make sure that we are mitigating the risk of the emotional baggage that we bring into or sustain in a marriage. And a lot of times the responsibility that we take on is due to insecurities that we have. Oof. Right? So if we address the insecurity, then we're much more likely not to go buy that bigger house that has a bigger note.
Right.
That makes us work longer.
More responsibility.
Right.
Less time for reflection.
Right.
Less time for growth.
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
We're able to say, like, look, hey, I know I'm driving this really beat up, banged up car, and I have no plans to go buy another one so we can look better. I would much rather have time to spend with you because I'm not having to stay in a job. And that takes a vulnerability and a courage to position that for your significant other, that you are mitigating the emotional risk by decreasing the amount of responsibility because you have assessed the level of insecurity and emotional debt that needs to be taken care of.
So many golden nuggets in there. I don't even know where to start.
The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bold Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.